This is the story of Jacob and the adversity that he faced during his lifetime. Okay.
What adversity did Jacob face?
Jacob faced a lot of adversity in his life for many reasons because he tricked people and lied. The first adversity Jacob faced was he wasn't the firstborn, but God had promised his mother Rebekah that he would be the firstborn. And so Jacob, without trusting God, tricked his brother Esau, his twin brother, into taking his birthright. And how he did that was one day when Esau came back from hunting, Jacob was making soup, and Esau was like, I really want some soup because I'm really hungry. And Jacob said, by tricking him, I'll give you soup if you give me my birthright. And Esau was very short-minded and didn't look into the future and what was going to happen if he sold his birthright, so he sold his birthright for the food. And then the second adversity he faced was Jacob stole also Esau's blessing. And he did this by tricking Isaac when he was very old, when Isaac was going to give Esau the blessing. And when Esau found this out, he was very mad and wanted to kill Jacob. So his mother told him to run to her brother's house. And there Laban, her brother, had two girls, and Rachel and Leah. And when Jacob saw Rachel, he fell in love with her and wanted to marry her. However, Laban was just as tricky as Jacob and said the only way he could have Rachel's hand in marriage was for 7 years of labor. But what ended up happening was on their wedding night, Laban switched Rachel and Leah, his older daughter, and Jacob married Leah. And so Laban was tricky like that, and he made Jacob work another 7 years to get Rachel's hand in marriage. And once he got Rachel's hand in marriage, there were a lot of other conflicts about who would get what in the animals and stuff. And Jacob ended up fleeing for his life because Laban wanted to kill him. The fourth adversity he faced was when he was fleeing for his life from Laban's house. He had to go through Esau's land, and he hadn't seen his brother Esau in like 20 years from being at Laban's house. And so he, without trusting God, had just thought of a scheme to try to have Esau like him again and like him better. But then he ended up trusting God and let it go, and Esau had ended up forgiving him, and they met and forgave each other. The final adversity that Jacob faced was when he was much older and he had already had all his kids. There was a famine in his country, and they were all about to die, and his son Joseph had been with Pharaoh in Egypt, and he brought all of him, Jacob and all of his brothers, to Egypt to give them food so they could survive. Okay, so who are the people involved with Jacob's adversity?
The people involved in Jacob's adversity were first his parents, his dad loving his brother Esau more and his mom loving Jacob more. Because when it came to the blessing, Isaac, his dad, wanted to give it to Esau being the firstborn, but his mom wanted Jacob to have it because he was her favorite. The next person he had adversity with was his older brother Esau, because he took the birthright from Esau, the family blessing from Esau, and that didn't turn out too well because then later Esau wanted to kill him. So Jacob had to run away to his uncle Laban's land, where he fell in love with Rachel. So Laban said, I'd let you marry Rachel if you work 7 years for me. So like Rebekah said, he worked 7 years, and on their wedding night, Laban switched out the two daughters and he got Leah. Furious, he talked to Laban and said, for another 7 years you can marry her. You can marry Rachel. So after another 7 years, he got to marry Rachel, but for 6 more years he had arguments with Laban, so then he had to run away and go back to his brother and had to go back home, but he had to cross over his brother Esau's land, which then meant he had to face his brother after all that he had done to him. What was Jacob's role of faith, and how did it change over the lifetime?
Okay, in the beginning of the passage that we read, Jacob was selfish. He had a lot of disbelief. He was a liar, foolish, and deceiving. Jacob was selfish because he took his brother's birthright and didn't care about his only brother. And he had a lot of disbelief because he wasn't turning to God, because before Jacob was born, God had promised him the things he was going to do for him, but he didn't let God work, and he kind of tried to take things into his own hands, and that's how he was disbeliefful. Jacob was a liar because he lied to his dad about being his brother when his dad was old and sick. And Jacob was foolish because he did all these things for himself but didn't think about like the long-term damage that it would have. How he had to run away to his uncles, and he would have to work 7 years and those kind of things. Jacob was also deceiving because he deceived his father when he lied about being his brother, and he got deceived when Laban put his daughter Leah in bed with Jacob. And that's how Jacob was like before adversity, and when he was facing adversity, all these negative things. And then through Jacob's adversity, he became trusting, selfless, compliant, hopeful, and obedient. Jacob became trusting because he started to trust God more during his adversity and let him work and do the things that he had promised instead of trying to take things into his own hands. Jacob was also selfless because he worked 7 years and then had to continue working after he slept with Leah. And so he had to work multiple number of years to marry the love of his life. And so he gave up his own time to marry his wife. And then Jacob was compliant because he worked together, and he ended up like working together to get what he wanted. And why else was he compliant? Oh, he was compliant because he worked with God kind of, and let God do his work and let God be in control. Jacob was hopeful because he had hope that God would bring him out of this adversity and carry him through the adversity. And Jacob was also obedient to God, that he would show that he showed that he was God's servant, and that he would do it.
Okay, so how does Jacob foreshadow Jesus in the story?
Well, Jacob foreshadows Jesus because through his great-grandfather and dad, God had made a promise that a Savior would come from their descendants. And the promise was passed on from Abraham to Isaac, and then to Jacob. Jacob also had the 12 sons of Israel. And then Judah, one of the 12 sons, the descendants came Jesus. And then so that's how Jacob connects to Jesus and the 12 sons of Israel.
And then for the bow tie, this is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is in the Old Testament before Christ came, and how God had promised between them that he would send a Savior. And then he sent a Savior through Judah, the tribe of Israel. And that's how he connects